I don't get far enough into a boring book to hate it. Gary Wills.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. And as the one who is far more likely to just throw a book across the room or, use it for practicing origami than you, I completely agree with this opening quote we had today.
Yes, we are talking today about books that have a very slow and meandering progression. This is especially problematic in the beginning of a book, but that's not the only place that it can cause a problem. My tolerance level of this at the beginning of a book is pretty high. I can handle a little bit of a slow progression, but if it doesn't start getting into something by about page 50, I'm out.
My tolerance is like a 3 out of 10. I have read enough bad books in my time that I feel like if I'm especially reading for entertainment, I'm wasting my time if I'm not into at least something interesting within like 10 pages. I know it's not really popular, especially with like writing classes and teachers, because you want to have this gorgeous opening and then something happens. Just get to the good part.
Yeah. My tolerance level does change towards the ending of a book, and I'll talk a little bit more about this because I just experienced this problem of a really slow ending, and my tolerance level for that is like 1 out of 10. I am so fed up with this book, I could rant about it for hours. I'm pretty sure I kind of have already to Lee.
It was a good 10 minutes before we started that I just sort of I took notes for the rest of this month's recordings.
Yeah, just while I ranted. So when we are talking about a slow or a meandering progression in a book, it is usually caused by having a lot of details or a lot of scenes that just don't build towards anything. They just exist in a story to allow the author to paint the pretty picture or to describe the main character for literally no reason. Or in the last book I didn't finish, a re-explanation and a wrap-up of everything that had happened in the first book. Like, I already read that. I don't need to read it again.
Another example of this type of novel red flag is when something doesn't connect. If you've ever read A Study in Scarlet, which is the first Sherlock Holmes story, Act 2, in almost its entirety, has nothing to do with Sherlock or Watson. When I was first listening to it, it was on a free audiobook site, and I thought they had screwed up the files because we ended up in Midwest American history. What? What's happening right now? And then Act 3, they tied them back together. But this type of disconnect, especially from your main characters whom we've established and we're starting to fall in love with, can be very dangerous and cause a lot of people to set that book aside.
The last thing that we're going to talk about that really makes a book have a very slow progression and meandering progress is the slow denouement. When after the climax of the book, that final peak, you take so much time wrapping it all up that it almost feels like there should still be more to the story, that there should be another final conflict. I just finished reading a book, and overall I was impressed. It was a small press, kind of indie publish that had gotten a lot of attention on TikTok. We get to this part in the story where it is apparently the climax of the story. It's the final conflict, and it happens, and there's like 150 pages, 100 pages left. So not only did this slow, meandering denouement nullify the climax because I kept waiting for the actual climax of the story, but it took away from the character's story because they started to regress back to before the life-changing events of the climax.
Now, there are a couple of things that aren't a novel red flag that can sometimes feel like that slow, meandering progression we're talking about. The first one is a slow burn type of story, where you're doing things little by little. We don't have to reach the character's change so quick, especially in, for instance, in Enemies to Lovers. They don't have to become lovers at the end of Act 1. Stuff doesn't have to happen quickly in order for it to feel like a fast-paced novel.
Now, this is a kind of delicate one because to one person, what is a slow burn is to another person a slow book. I personally liked The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I thought it was a very slow burn story. Lee thought it was a slow book. So this is a delicate balance to strike, but if you know your target audience and what they like in a slow burn, it's easily achievable.
The next thing that might be misconstrued as this slow meandering progress, which actually isn't, is what we call the Sanderson avalanche. All of these bits and pieces in your story are building to something. They are important. They don't always seem like it initially.
And it doesn't have to be Sanderson. There are other authors that do it, but it's been nicknamed the Sanderson Avalanche because he's really good at it. He does it in almost every single book that he writes. Throughout the whole book, there are little scenes and little pieces that at the time don't really feel relevant. They seem a little bit disconnected in how they're presented until the end of the book as part of this Sanderson Avalanche, where all of a sudden, all of these little pieces from the whole book are starting to come together, and you see it all in a big whole picture. So yes, while it felt a little bit slow, it's all actually relevant in the end. So if you can make all of those little moments relevant to your story, then it's not slow.
Another thing we want to make sure we aren't preaching against are those little details. Having details to especially describe the scene help immerse your reader. These are the moments where we catch a whiff of something, and we as the reader can imagine the rain on the asphalt. That helps us be immersed in the scene and helps us get into the shoes of the main character. This is most often at the beginning of a scene or between scenes. These types of details help you engage the reader. So if you are using details to engage the reader versus preaching at or boring the reader, these are very different kinds of uses of details in your story.
So by all means, describe that tree. Do it in a paragraph, not in 3 pages.
My rule of thumb is however long the point of view character is spending on whatever the detail is, that's how long you as the writer get to spend on that thing. If I am leaving the house, going to my car so I can drive to work, I don't care about that sunrise. Yep, the sun's coming up, cool. If I am sitting on the back porch with an Italian espresso in my hands, watching the sunrise, I'm going to be spending a lot more time thinking about it, a lot more time watching it. I get to tell a lot more of those details.
The reason why slow progress is a red flag for readers is because it shows the audience that you're not respecting the reader or their time. You're telling them, I want you to pay $15 for this book and then listen to me prattle on for 20,000 words before the story even begins.
Readers are purchasing your book as an exchange of goods. I will pay for this book, but in exchange, you have to entertain me. Whatever they're paying for, give them that as soon as possible. Yes, you are more than welcome to write those 20,000 words of setup and whatever else, but if it's not integrated with entertainment, it feels like you're preaching, and they are not getting what they're paying for. So yes, write those things. Writing selfishly is always something that we will encourage. But make sure you edit with your audience in mind.
If you edit with your audience in mind, that will help you get rid of a lot of the unnecessary details. If you edit it from the mindset of a reader, would you spend that much time on someone else's book that takes that long to get into the actual story? If your answer is no, then you should really rewrite the beginning. You should really tighten up those edges, those pieces, to make the book flow faster. So how do you tighten it up? How do you get rid of that slow progress that isn't intentional?
One of the first things that I do is to make sure that as many of these scenes as possible are anchored in a place. Make sure that each scene has a point. Each idea is happening within a scene, within a character's point of view.
So every single scene should serve one, we recommend actually at least 2 purposes for the book as a whole. It should be adding to the world building. It should be contributing to the plot. It should be contributing to the character story progression. It should be contributing maybe to their romance progression.
If you're finding that you have especially 2 scenes back to back that only have one purpose each, consider combining the scenes. Instead of having the character explore the holiday festival and then meet up with the romantic interest and have a romantic moment. Combine these 2, have the romantic interest conversation at the festival. That makes the scene more interesting, that keeps things moving a lot faster and gives you a lot more room. Another way to avoid or fix these types of things is to experiment with the types of things that you can cut out while still maintaining the structure of the story.
See if maybe you can cut out a chapter or 2 at the beginning. If you get rid of the bad beginning, a lot of the times you will start in a much better place and the progress of the book will be a lot faster and the readers will be more engaged right from the beginning. And apply that to the rest of the book. Is there another part of your book that could just be removed?
So a lot of this comes down to reading your book from an audience's point of view. That's really hard to do if you aren't a reader yourself, because you aren't experiencing a lot of these novel red flags on the other side from the reader's point of view. So make sure you're reading a lot and you're editing really well, but all of that can only happen if you
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.